Welcome to Early Matters, the podcast on the science and policy of early childhood, hosted by Dr. Catherine B. Stevens. Early Matters features in-depth conversations with leading researchers, practitioners, and policy experts on what matters most for young children and their families to thrive.
Welcome back to Early Matters. I'm Catherine Stevens, your host and the founder and president of the Center on Child and Family Policy. I'm delighted to welcome Ivana Greco back to the podcast today. Ivana's professional background is as an attorney. She graduated cum laude from Harvard Law School in 2011 and worked for a decade as a successful lawyer. A couple of years ago, Ivana left her paid job to work as a stay-at-home mother of her 3 children, caring for a toddler and homeschooling her 2 young sons. She's also a wonderful writer, publishing regularly on family policy and other issues that impact stay-at-home parents. And I'm very proud that she's also a member of the Center on Child and Family Policy's Advisory Council. Ivana joined the podcast a couple of months ago to talk about her fairly unusual path from successful Harvard-educated attorney to full-time homemaker. It was a fascinating conversation and very much worth listening to if you haven't had a chance yet. I asked her to come back to the podcast today to talk about a proposal she put forward a couple of months ago for what she calls a GI Bill for homemakers. I'm excited to talk with her about this really interesting idea today. Ivana, thanks so much for joining Early Matters.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here.
So, as I said, you wrote an article on this, which we'll link in the podcast description, titled Protecting the Home Front: Why We Need a GI Bill for Homemakers. So to start with, can you explain what exactly the GI Bill is, what it does, and where it came from?
Sure. So it's a fairly old piece of legislation. It was adopted during World War II, and the motivating force behind it was to ease the reentry of servicemen from World War II into civilian society. So it had essentially 2 major benefits. It provided educational benefits for servicemen who were returning, usually to go to college. And then it also had another bucket of benefits to make it easier for these servicemen to buy houses. So at the time, there was a lot of concern about how these largely young men who had been fighting abroad could be reintegrated into normal civilian life here in the United States. The bill, which was facially race and class neutral. Of course, it wasn't perfect and it was applied very imperfectly, but turned out to be one of the most powerful forces for social mobility in the United States. It's been nicknamed the magic carpet to the middle class. And so what it's done in practice, and again, it's not perfect, I'm not claiming it's a perfect bill, but what it's done in practice is it's made it possible for people who are from working class or from poor backgrounds who join the military to spend some amount of time in service and then attend technical training or go and get a college degree. There's this mortgage benefit as well, and really get a boost up in civilian life once they leave their military service.
So to introduce your idea, you've compared the life trajectories of Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor and her colleague, Justice William Rehnquist. Can you describe that comparison and what you think it tells us about this subject?
Yeah, I think that is a really powerful comparison. So O'Connor and Rehnquist were classmates at Stanford Law School back in the 50s, and they both were at the tippy top of their class. I think Rehnquist may have been first and O'Connor was third. So they had very similar educational backgrounds. Kind of interest, Rehnquist had been in the military before he went to law school and used the GI Bill to pay for his education once he left military service. So where their paths start to diverge is immediately after they graduate from law school. So Rehnquist graduates from law school. He, right out of the gate, gets a really good clerkship. He then gets another really good clerkship at the Supreme Court. Then he goes into private practice. His career trajectory is just basically a straight arrow to his eventual seat at the Supreme Court. O'Connor has a much more difficult path. Despite graduating third in her class at Stanford, she can't get a job when she graduates. None of the major law firms will hire her because she's a woman. So eventually she offers to work for free at California's equivalent of a local district attorney's office. And she finally gets employment that way. It turns eventually into paid employment. But then she runs into another hurdle, which is once she starts having her children, she really struggles to balance the practice of law with her kids. And eventually her babysitter quits, and she does try to find another one, but she can't find anybody she likes. She drops out of the workforce for 5 years to take care of her 3 young children. So we really have this parallel where Rehnquist, a man, just gets on the elevator basically to the Supreme Court, even though he has 3 kids himself. That never provides any barrier to him. Where O'Connor, a woman, faces all these hurdles. Eventually, after being out of the workforce for 5 years, she does re-enter the workforce. She becomes very involved in politics, and this is her eventual ticket to the Supreme Court. But it really is a striking comparison between the career trajectories of the two of them.
Yeah, and you had pointed out in your piece how for Justice Rehnquist, his military service served as a kind of invaluable launching pad for his arrow straight up. That it was that service and the benefits that he was granted in recognition of that service that enabled him to go to law school in the first place. And you were comparing that to what could, I think, well be described as Sandra Day O'Connor's service, which was, in your words, not on the military front, but rather on the home front. And how rather than that serving as a launching pad, it actually served as a daunting obstacle. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So O'Connor, she's at home. She's raising 3 kids, which of course is a huge job. And it's a job that's not only useful to her, it's useful to the rest of the community. We depend upon people having children and raising them right. And O'Connor certainly was participating in that. And then, like many homemakers at the time and now, she also was doing tons of unpaid community service. She had pro bono legal work that she did. She volunteered in local politics. She even joked that it was less work to go back to a full-time job than it was fulfilling all her volunteer commitments. So we talk about dropping out of the workforce, but to say what Sandra Day O'Connor did during those 5 years she was home with her children as not working is crazy. She was working very hard. What she was doing was very socially utile. And yet it was seen as like a drag on her eventual professional career, not a booster, unlike Rehnquist, who served in the military. Certainly that is something deserving of appreciation, and it was appreciated.
So, reflecting those two stories, you have written that America needs a GI Bill for her mothers and fathers who have spent time on the home front, devoting themselves to the important work of the family, treating homemaker service with the same respect and support as we do military service. So, specifically, what does your proposal call for?
So I should say that I'm not calling for a literal GI Bill for homemakers. I don't think that's realistic. I don't think our federal government is going to pass something like that. So that is not what I have in mind. It's more of a metaphor than like, let's copy what we did with the GI Bill and apply it to homemakers.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm calling for at base is a recognition that the men and women who devote themselves to the work of the home are providing something that's very socially important. So just as we recognize that our military servicemen and now women are providing a very important service, I think as a society, we need to come to recognize that homemakers are doing the same thing.
So what are the specific kinds of things, sort of concrete ideas, if not a exact GI Bill, what are the kinds of things that you could imagine being part of that?
So there's 2 buckets of policies that I envision. The first is providing a way for moms and dads who have been at home to go back to school if they need to re-enter the workforce. So I can envision a number of different ways that this could happen. One is the federal government could set up a program to make that possible. States could set up a bucket of funds to make that possible. Individual colleges or universities could look for ways to grant scholarships to such people. I think when it comes to this particular topic, we don't need to solely focus on what the federal government can do. I think there's a wide range of options for private citizens, for universities, for training programs, and for state governments to step in and say, look, these people have done something really important, but often they either want or need to go back to work. Maybe there's been a change in the family situation. Maybe it's just the kids are grown and you're looking for something new to do. And a lot of times they could use a boost in terms of education to make it back into the workforce. So that's one bucket. The other bucket is to make it possible for employers to hire people who have been at home for a while. Often if you've been a mom at home for 10 years and you're looking to go back to work and you don't necessarily want a new college degree, you just want a job, it is very difficult. Your resume is going to be put in the less good pile than someone who's had a more continuous career arc. So in the essay, I talk about ways that employers either could be incentivized or could take it upon themselves to hire people who've been at home with their kids.
Mm-hmm. So in the piece, and in your telling of the story of the trajectory of Justice O'Connor, you've described the obstacles and even discrimination that mothers face or did face in returning to the workforce after spending time at home caring for children. And I'm wondering if you could talk more about that. Aren't there already legal protections for those women?
There are, but they're not comprehensive enough. So I want to start by talking about what the obstacles are that women face when they go back into the workforce, because there is, unfortunately, still quite a bit of discrimination against caregiving mothers in the workforce. I think it's been called something like the maternal wall. And so it's very hard to tease out because some of the differences between what you see in wages and professional attainment of mothers versus other women is voluntary. It's due to the fact that mothers, in some cases, prefer not to take really high paying, hard charging jobs. But there is still a significant amount of just pure discrimination that occurs with regard to mothers also. So that is one problem. The problem is basically put on steroids when you're talking about not merely someone who is a mother at work, but someone who has dropped out of the workforce and seeks to return to work. So one study I read that I found really eye-opening showed that when you give employers identical resumes, but different reasons why this hypothetical person is looking for a new job, employers will prefer someone who lost their job to a mom who voluntarily stepped out of the workforce. So employers often, when they're hiring people, they're looking for this quote unquote ideal worker, someone who will give everything basically to their jobs. And so if you have signaled that you're not going to be that ideal worker because you've spent time at home taking care of your kids, you're just at a disadvantage in this marketplace that we've created, or this ideal that employers have about who it is that they want to hire.
And so you're talking about discrimination, putting resumes in this pile versus that pile. As I was suggesting, is discrimination not already illegal? Is this legally permitted? And if so, why?
Yeah, so it's not permissible to discriminate against somebody based on their sex. But under federal law, there is no barrier to discriminating or not preferring someone based on their status as a caregiver. So when you talk about Title VII, there are protected categories, race, religion, sex, but being a mother is not among them. So even during the COVID-19 pandemic, this came up where a lot of people were suddenly faced with even more serious conflicts between their obligations to their children and their obligations to their job. And at the time, the Biden Department of Labor issued guidance that said there are some remedies available, but it's not illegal to discriminate against an employer based on caregiver status. So that just is the lay of the land in terms of federal law. There are states that provide protections for caregiving status. New York, for example, does make it illegal to discriminate against someone who is a caregiver just by virtue of the fact that they're a caregiver. But that doesn't exist across all 50 states, and it doesn't exist at the federal level either.
Mm-hmm. So, if I'm understanding correctly, part of what you're suggesting here is instead of prior full time parenting being a liability, that actually be flipped. And rather than hiring discrimination, there would even be hiring preference for parents who were at home full time and then returning to the workforce.
Yeah. So, what I would love to see, and it does already exist for some employers, but what I would love to see more broadly is programs like the ones that exist at some Fortune 500 companies, where they make a real effort to go out and hire women, and sometimes it's men who've been home with their kids, and integrate them back into the workforce. And so the Fortune 500 companies are doing this because they have talent problems. So they may know they have a former employee who was great. She got great reviews. And then when she had that third child, it was just too much and she dropped out. And when they're considering what to do in a talent shortage, they'll be like, oh, let's see if we can get so and so back. That is a program that exists in large companies. It's much more unusual to see those kinds of programs or that kind of thought process as applied to working class mothers. There just isn't the same urgency that you see at the very high levels about thinking, we don't have enough qualified workers. What can we do to make it easier for moms at home or dads at home to come work for us?
Mm-hmm. And at the same time, is it true that there's a greater proportion of lower and working income families, mothers who are at home full time with their kids compared to higher income populations? Is that correct?
So, stay-at-home moms form essentially a U-shaped distribution. So, you see them more often in working class families, and then you see them less often in middle class families, and then we're bending around the curve of the U, and then you see them more often in upper class families. So, my view would be that when it comes to the upper class, those stay-at-home moms largely are protected. These are the people that the Fortune 500 companies are trying to get back in, or they already have quite a lot of family resources. So it's not perfect, but there's a lot there for them. The people who I'm most concerned about are, we're going around the curve of the U again, the working class or lower class stay-at-home moms who may drop out of the workforce for a decade to raise kids. And then when those kids are getting bigger, it's always been hard to make ends meet and they want to go back to work. And that can be a real uphill climb for them. Um, and the other thing I'd say about that group of people, why I really prefer these kind of affirmative programs, is when you're talking about someone who doesn't have a ton of education and is trying to get a job, discrimination lawsuits are just usually not very protective for them. Some people might say, well, let's just fix this problem by applying the New York style law nationwide. And if you look at the stats, I'm not in any way opposed to discrimination law. It's done a lot of good in making work more accessible to different races and sexes and so forth. But on average, the benefits of that tend to accrue in upper class workers and bigger companies, because those big companies, those higher level jobs, those are the people most likely to sue. Those big companies are the ones with the huge HR departments, so they're the ones really keeping abreast of all the latest developments in these lawsuits. And so when it comes to a working class mom, she's just much less likely to be able to take advantage of this kind of protected classification. And so it would be great and really important for someone like this to have a entry-level job that said, hey, we really value the work you did at home. We're going to train you up to be the shift manager, get your CNA license. There's a lot of different options, but your service at home was really valuable. And it's affirmatively good to have you come work on board, as opposed to we're worried about a lawsuit if we don't hire you, which is just a very different dynamic.
Right, exactly. So this seems to make so much sense. What is it about the history of this issue? Why do you think the US hasn't been more focused on these kinds of solutions?
So I think it has a lot to do with how the feminist movement evolved in this country. So to take us all the way back to what's called first wave feminism, the suffragettes, the original, what might be called feminists in this country, they were the first people to draw this link between veterans and mothers. So I got this idea from reading Erica Bacciocchi, who is a legal scholar. Her work on what's called the maternalist movement that occurred contemporaneous and a little after the Civil War, where these women were fighting for the right to vote, but they also were fighting for other protections for mothers. And so they said, the same way that we need to protect Civil War veterans, we also need to protect mothers. And so this was very linked in kind of the popular imagination. But then when we got to the so-called second wave feminists, the 60s and 70s, Betty Friedan and her cohort, they went a different direction. So instead of, by and large, I don't want to paint with too broad a brush here, but by and large, instead of valuing the work of the home, instead what they said is women really need to be in paid work. And at least in Betty Friedan's case, she coupled that with saying a lot of really nasty things about homemakers. In her book, The Feminine Mystique, which, as I'm sure you know, was tremendously popular, tremendously influential, she links women who are homemakers with this whole host of social ills. She says they're responsible for battered child syndrome. She says that they are responsible for what she calls latent or overt homosexuality. At some point, she compares them to concentration camp victims. It really is something, as a modern 24 reader going back and reading this, you're like, I don't understand how this passed mustard, but of course it was a very different time. So they dropped, in essence, this push towards seeking recognition and benefits for mothers at home and really focused on how do we get women into the paid workforce and able to achieve equal professional respect with men. And to be clear, it is a very good thing that they were very focused on making sure women's doors were open to enter the workforce. But I do think it was an error to drop the emphasis on the importance of women's work at home, because I think that was important at the time, that remains important now.
So you've been talking about how this set of ideas benefits homemakers, which, as I said, to me makes a great deal of sense. Why do you think this also makes sense for our society as a whole?
So I think we still have not reckoned with the downsides of what happened when women entered the workforce in large numbers. And again, I just want to be totally clear. I think it is great that women are able to achieve the very highest pinnacles of professional success. That was hard fought for. We needed that. I think it is great that women are able to go to every college in the nation, PhD programs, all those were needed, just so we're clear on that. But I think we've been slow to recognize kind of the community alienation, the pressure on children, and the pressure on families that resulted from a switch from a breadwinner homemaker model to a two-income parent model. So one of the ways I think in which we see this is before women entered the workforce in large numbers, they often ran most of the charitable organizations in the communities they were. They often served as, I don't know if there's a word for this, but a way to knit communities together. It was these women who were hosting the coffee hours and the church barbecues and, the potlucks that really bound communities together. And they also made their neighborhoods incredibly vibrant. So when you talk about a modern bedroom community in which the parents get on the train to go to the city to work and the kids go off to school and then to aftercare programs, that community during the day is not really alive. It's pretty empty. And if you compare that to a community with a lot of homemakers in it, that community really is alive. And so the kids might get out of school at 2:40, they're playing in the neighborhood because their mom is home and other moms are home. So it's okay for the kids kind of to be roaming around, not directly supervised.
And increasingly, fathers even may be home.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
So communities that have someone at home during the day are very different than communities where everybody's just kind of going their separate ways. And so I do think we need more stay-at-home moms and dads for the people who want to do that job. And I think polling is telling us that there are a lot of people who want to be a stay-at-home mom or dad and find it too risky to do so. So I think we have a mismatch between people's preferences and what's occurring on the ground. And I also think that that mismatch is having negative social impacts. And so this is one way I see that we could help fix that.
So I have heard people argue that while recognizing that homemakers play a valuable or could play a valuable role in what you're describing, sort of the fabric of communities, that really the most important metric we need to be focused on is GDP. That's really, I think, come to be our overall measure of the well-being, the success of our society, and that with acknowledging these potential upsides, that it just detracts too much from GDP to be actually even encouraging, rewarding parents for stepping out of the workforce for some period of time. What are your thoughts on that?
So I think that GDP is a good metric, but it's only a metric. And in fact, the person who had one of the most significant hands in creating it, Simon, I think his last name is pronounced Kuznets, said that one of the main problems with it was that it did not take into account the value of unpaid household labor. So when you try to correct the GDP to take into account all the unpaid labor of these men and women at home, you find that what they're doing is in the trillions of dollars. So it's has a very significant impact on the economic